Good? Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Welcome to you all, and thank you for coming out to tonight's meeting of the Peoria Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm going to start off tonight's meeting by taking roll. First up, we have Commissioner Brian Patterson.
Present.
I'm Commissioner Sean Hutchinson. Commissioner Bill Lewis is not with us, and neither is Commissioner Jay Outluski. Commissioner Jeff Nelson.
Present.
And Commissioner Clay Alsop. There you are. Okay, I'm going to get started by reading an opening statement. This commission is composed of Peoria citizens who have been appointed by the City Council to serve on this commission as a civic responsibility without compensation. Our duty is to study and review planning and zoning issues within the City of Peoria and then forward our recommendations to the City Council. Our hearings are conducted in accordance with Robert's Rules of Order. Each case will be called in the order in which it appears on the agenda, unless otherwise announced during the meeting. In the interest of maintaining a fair and efficient hearing, the Commission adheres to the following steps. Chairperson calls the case. Staff gives a brief report and recommendation. Applicant gives a presentation. Opposition and support gives testimony. Generally limited to 3 minutes per speaker, please. Applicant may give rebuttal, commission discussion, and decision. Anyone wishing to speak must complete a speaker request form and hand it to the planning assistant on my left at the end of the dais. Please be as brief as possible and do not repeat statements already made by others. Anyone wishing to protest the decision of the commission public hearing item must request a second public hearing, and that will be before the City Council. The request must be submitted in writing to the Planning and Community Development Department within 10 days after the commission hearing. All commission recommendations on public hearing items move forward at a regular City Council meeting. The City Council will then act upon the recommendation of the commission. They may concur with the decision, modify it, or overturn it. We welcome citizens' comments, and as fellow citizens of Peoria, we thank you in advance for your participation. So this will be the final call for speaker request forms. If anybody would like to speak, please fill out a form and turn it in to the end of the dais. First up tonight, we're going to have the consent agenda. It's for items that are routine in nature and consist of 3 items tonight. Item 1C is the disposition of absence. Discussion of possible action to approve and/or excuse the absences of Commissioner Bill Lewis and Clay Alsop from the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting held August 17th of 2017. 2C is discussion and possible action to approve the minutes of the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting held on August 17th of 2017. And item 3C, which is conditional use permit CU 1710, Avanti Senior Living, a request to obtain a conditional use permit for a long-term care facility within an undeveloped site. The subject property is located north of the northwest corner of Lake Pleasant Parkway and Jomax Road. The site is zoned Pleasant Valley Planned Area Development. Okay, do any commissioners have any questions and/or comments on the consent agenda? Okay, seeing none, do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the consent agenda.
Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner Patterson
A second.
and seconded by Commissioner Nelson. Please vote. And it passes unanimously. We'll now move on to new business, and first on the agenda, we have item 4R, that is Z13-0008, Hidden Paradise Estates. A request to consider a request to rezone approximately 77.86 acres located at the southeast corner of Patrick Lane and 79th Avenue from single-family residential R135 to the Hidden Paradise Estates Planned Area Development Zoning District. The proposed PAD would allow development of up to 114 single-family residences. Staff, could you please give the report?
Good evening, Chair Hutchinson, members of the Commission. The item before you is actually Z13-0008, the Hidden Paradise Estates rezoning. The property is located southeast at the southeast corner of 79th Avenue and Patrick Lane. And the request we have before you tonight is to rezone the property from the current single-family residential R135 to the Hidden Paradise Estates planned area development for single-family residential. The project is slightly under 78 acres in size, and the applicant is Cohen Van Lewis Consultants. As you can see, to the north, we have the planned Riverwalk residential development. To the east of the property is the New River Wash, as well as the Hillcrest development that's located within the city of Glendale. South of the property is the already developed Fletcher Heights neighborhood. And to the west are large lot residential, rural residential, and vacant undeveloped lots that are located within a county island. As mentioned, the current zoning of the site is R135. The surrounding zoning districts to the north include SR43, R135, as well as the Riverwalk planned area development. To the south is the Fletcher Heights PAD for single-family residential. As mentioned, to the east, the Hillcrest development is a PAD development within the city of Glendale. And to the west is the Maricopa County's zoning district, Rural 43. The Riverwalk zoning has lots that are 8,000 and 10,000 square foot adjacent to the Hidden Paradise proposal. However, the pre-plat for that development does indicate larger 12,600 square foot lots adjacent to the property line. The Fletcher Heights development adjacent to this property consists of lots that are between 7,000 to 8,000 square feet in size. The existing Hillcrest Ranch development has lots that are approximately 8,000 square feet. And the RU43 has been developed and has undeveloped lots that are between 1 to 3 acres in size. With this rezoning request is a proposal for 114 single-family home lots with a proposed density overall of 1.47 dwelling units per acre. The density within the project does vary and contains a variety of lot sizes. The general plan land use designation for the property is estate density residential. This allows a range between 1 to 2 dwelling units per acre and has a target of 1 dwelling unit per acre. This project does exceed the target density for the estate density residential category. However, the general plan allows for projects to exceed that density if they meet certain criteria, generally items that exceed the minimum standards, so a project that exceeds the minimum requirements in certain aspects. This particular project has significant open space, far exceeding the city's minimum requirements, both for the general site area as well as amenities. Because of the New River Wash preservation area, as well as on-site open space, over 28 acres of the site will be preserved, or will be open space, and that equates to 36% of the gross site area. The amenities of the project include a variety of on-site trails, as well as completion of the portion of the New River Trail adjacent to the project. As noted, the density also fits the context of the area, with the lot sizes and densities consistent with the surrounding developed residential neighborhoods. What you see before you is a current conceptual development plan for the Hidden Paradise Estates neighborhood, indicating the 114 proposed lots, with an average lot size of approximately 15,214 square feet. Lots range from 12,000 to 24,000 square feet in area. As mentioned, the acreage for open space, total open space, is approximately 28 acres or 36% of the site. So you can see on the map, essentially a large chunk of the eastern portion of the site will remain as preserved New River Wash corridor. In addition to the preserved open space, which equates to 15 acres of the site, there's also will be a minimum of 6 acres of usable open space within the project, meeting the city's definition of usable open space, containing amenities such as turfed areas for open play, as well as items such as ramadas, barbecue areas, tot lots, etc. The amenities for this specific project will also include a dog park and shaded benches. Trails along the north and south boundaries of the development connect to the New River Trail and the Hidden Paradise Estates development would construct the portion of the New River Trail adjacent to this project. So you can see the connections will not only serve the future residents of this neighborhood, but will also provide connections for those neighborhoods to the north, west, and south of this project area. So this was an iterative project, and later on in the presentation, we'll show you some of the changes that have been made over time. The development standards that are proposed are consistent as a whole, or most compatible in comparison to the R112 zoning district. The majority of the standards are in line with that district. However, there are a few modifications, some that are more restrictive and some that are more customized to this development. In particular, you can see that the minimum lot width will actually exceed the minimums for the R112 zoning district. And in addition, the minimum lot depth is also considerably larger at 150 feet instead of 100 feet. The proposed lot coverage is slightly above the city's R112 zoning district at 45%. This is consistent with a number of other developments that have requested slightly higher lot coverage to allow for the additional or the additions later on once an individual moves into a home and they may wish to add sheds, accessory structures, that sort of thing. The interior setbacks are also slightly modified for this proposal. The standard R112 zoning district would have a minimum of 5-foot setback and a minimum of total of 15. So that could be equated to a minimum of 5 on one side, 10 on the other, 7.5 and 7.5, etc. But the total of the two sides would be 15. This proposal has the same minimum setback. However, the total between the two sides is proposed at 13 feet instead of 15 feet. Public outreach for this project complied with the city's requirements, including notice of application and notice of hearing postcards mailed to residents as well as homeowners association within the vicinity as noted. The site was also posted with a sign in accordance with the city requirements. This case began in 2013, and as a result, public input has been involved through that entire 4-year span. There has been ongoing interest, public interest from the neighbors, particularly early on in the case. There was some opposition received, as well as comments that will be discussed further. Those have also been incorporated into modifications within the plan. No opposition has been received since June 2015, and that item will be discussed. The individual in that opposition wanted access to be maintained along the 79th Avenue alignment. This alignment was not preserved for a variety of reasons, some being other neighbors' concerns. So overall, the project was looking to balance the needs of the various surrounding neighborhoods and various issues that arose. The first neighborhood meeting was held in June of 2013. Approximately 12 members of the public were in attendance. And there was a second meeting 2 years later with approximately 8 members of the public in attendance. At those 2 meetings, a number of concerns were brought up. One of the main items in general was traffic, particularly traffic along Patrick Lane and Williams Road, leading from the project to the west. The applicant as well as staff worked with the traffic analysis to determine the best options for this project, knowing that regardless there would be additional traffic generated by any type of development on the project site, even that which is allowed today. Roadway improvements will be provided along 77th Avenue to the north, which will direct traffic away from the Patrick Lane, which will be a future connection. So the main project access going forward at the outset of the project will be north on 77th Avenue, which would connect to Pinnacle Peak Road. In the future, as the parcel directly north of this develops, a Patrick Lane connection will be added, which could add additional options for residents. However, that connection is not required to meet the traffic analysis. Essentially, the project can stand on its own with one primary connection through 77th Avenue. There was originally an access point shown to Williams Road. That was a concern of many neighbors due to the fact that traffic would likely not only take Williams Road, but essentially have a cut-through to the south through the Fletcher Heights neighborhood. Not only was this something brought up by the neighbors, but city staff did go out to view the site and actually take the roads and see if that was a likely option. And they did confirm that folks would probably very quickly learn the cut-through and take that so that they could head south to Deer Valley, where most of the traffic would be headed. As a result, the project did need 2 points of access, and the Williams Road connection was limited to emergency access only. So that would be available for fire or emergency personnel, but residents would not use that as an access point. An additional concern was an increase in the school population in the area. The developer has signed a developer assistance agreement with the Peoria Unified School District, and the district has provided a letter of support for this project proposal. There was also concern raised regarding 2-story homes to be located along the southern boundary of this project. The project as a whole would have contain a mix of both single-story and 2-story homes. Fletcher Heights, the development immediately to the south, does contain 2-story homes currently along that boundary, so they enjoy the benefits of having the 2-story option. However, in addition to the simple backyard distance between the existing development and this proposal, there will be a 40-foot landscape buffer that will be a corridor with a trail connection and significant landscaping. So there is a greater distance between the two. The houses will not back up immediately to each other. As a result, the future homes will actually be located more than 70 feet from the back of one home to the back of the new homes based on setbacks and that 40-foot buffer. There was also a preference expressed for larger lots. When the project began, the proposal included lots that were less than 8,000 square feet in area. Through the various iterations of this project, that has been increased to a 12,000 square foot minimum, and as noted before, some of the lots will range all the way up to 24,000 square feet in area. Over 92% of the lots will, in addition, be almost 14,000 square feet in size. So the 12,000 really is a minimum and not an average or typical lot size. So as I mentioned, this has been a very iterative process over a number of years, and the project has changed significantly in its appearance. This is one of the very early designs that included considerably higher number of lots at 175 instead of the 114 that you're seeing here today. In addition, the lot minimum at this point was 7,475. So the lots have increased by over 4,000 square feet in area for the smallest lot size. And you can see in future versions the connection that was proposed originally to Williams Road. In addition to there being concerns regarding cut-through traffic to the neighborhood to the south, there was also, it's a very limited access point given the existing well site that's located directly adjacent to that road connection. So it's a pinch point regardless. This version does show a Patrick Lane connection. Given concerns regarding the intersection, because the intersection is not complete on the north side of Patrick Lane, the northeast corner has not been developed yet, there was not an entire intersection. So that's why the Patrick Lane connection cannot be provided today. Essentially, there wasn't enough road width, even if the developer provided their entire half street. You're kind of dealing with a piece of an intersection. So that's why the connection is not being proposed at the outset. As you can see, the project starts to look a little bit more like the current proposal with fewer lots, more open space, larger lots, and the continued connections. And this being the final version for your consideration this evening, with the amenities shown as well as significant landscaped areas. The trails along the north and the south will be a variety of materials, so there will be options both for soft surface trail users as well as concrete paths for accessibility. The key findings of staff that the proposed zoning district is in conformance with the goals and objectives of the Peoria General Plan. The request is also consistent with the estate density residential category, exceeding the target but providing justification through the additional open space and amenities as described. The rezoning request is also compatible with the existing residential neighborhoods. And as the developer has entered into an assistance agreement with the school district has indicated support for this proposal. As you'll see in front of you, there has been one modification to the proposed stipulations of this case. The staff has worked with the applicant regarding some concerns they had regarding the timing of two engineering stipulations, numbers 7 and 8. The initial stipulations or original stipulations from your staff report are shown at the top with the replaced conditions as indicated on your screen. The conditions are very similar, however, they change the timing slightly to allow the project to proceed with initial development stages prior to some of the engineering documents needing to be submitted. With that, staff recommends approval of case Z13-0008 to City Council, subject to the conditions as outlined in your staff report and modified above. With that, I'd take any questions you may have.
Okay, any commissioners have any questions for staff? Commissioner Nelson.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the report, Ms. Sigmund. Appreciate that. I got to tell you, I'm bothered by this single access in and out of this development. I certainly, I'm really concerned why we got rid of that Williams Road access. I understand the reasons in your report. What's the timing of getting that access onto Patrick Lane? And well, go ahead and answer that one first. I have a follow-up.
Commissioner Nelson, the timing of that will honestly depend very much on the development to the north. So that property is undeveloped currently and has not dedicated right-of-way, which would be typically done at the time of a development proposal when they're coming in. So right now it's just a vacant lot. So the timing of that is uncertain. However, the traffic analysis did indicate it does meet all of the requirements. So that's why staff did put that in as a future improvement, so that for convenience, certainly we understand that with that number of lots, it would certainly be more desirable to have additional access points. However, the workability of the Williams Road connection was really limited, and as I said, the applicant was working to both meet the needs of the existing residents as well as deal with the access points, the desire for additional access through the development. So there were a number of variations that were looked at, and the city engineering, traffic engineering worked extensively with the applicant. I believe we're on approximately 7 to 8 reviews of this project, which is certainly about double the typical. So they worked closely with staff to try to come up with the best options. And we understand that that's why we tried to put that future connection in to allow the project a little breathing room for traffic in the future.
But again, no timing. It really depends on when that north piece of land is
Correct.
developed.
That would be the typical time that would occur.
And we couldn't require the developer to improve that intersection to make that connection?
Commissioner Nelson, the applicant actually did work, tried to obtain the right-of-way from the property owner to the north. I understand they may even still be making that attempt to move that along. And I understand it was a situation where that property owner was not interested, or they could not reach a compromise in terms of the purchase price for that.
Okay, thank you.
Agree with your concerns. Okay, any other questions for staff from the commissioners? No? Okay, with that, I'm going to open the public hearing. I'd like to call the applicant. Could you please state your name and address for the record, please?
My name is Ryan Weed. I'm president of Cohen Van Leeuwen Consultants. Address is 4550 North 12th Street in Phoenix.
Okay.
I don't have a formal presentation. I've seen several people come speaker request forms, so obviously they need some time to express their points. But if there's any questions for me directly regarding the project, I'd have to answer them.
Okay, any questions of the applicant? Commissioner Alsop.
Oh.
I noticed that the lot count significantly decreased over the years, and I'm wondering, was that a market-driven response or city?
Thank you.
Was the lot count decreased because of requirements imposed by the city, or was that at the developer's election?
Well, the lot count decrease was as a result of neighborhood meetings and neighborhood outreach that we completed on 2 occasions, as staff indicated, as well as several over-the-table meetings with Steve Campbell. As the city is well aware, there was strong opposition to the Riverwalk project to the north. In meeting with Steve Campbell, he ultimately provided us a letter of, I wouldn't call it support, but of letter of this meets his expectations of what he would see as a good transitional project between the Fletcher Heights community and the properties to the north of our project.
Sure, thanks. I did have just a general comment. I know Steve Campbell, and I know that he certainly has high standards for the area. And if the developer's gone into agreement with him, that goes a long way for me, thanks.
I can elaborate briefly on the Patrick Lane access. Our client did make effort to purchase what would then turn out to be dedicated right-of-way along what would be the north half of Patrick Lane. Presently, there's a well site that's outlined in a little rectangle just north of Lot 2. There's already an existing access easement for the water company to service that well site, so the property is already encumbered by roughly a 30-foot wide easement that would work out great as right-of-way to complete that intersection. Unfortunately, the property owner was unwilling to allow our client to purchase the right-of-way and install utilities and pavement at no cost. And rather, they elected to only sell all of the property. So unfortunately, our client really had no need to purchase all of the property. As you can tell, it doesn't create a very contiguous plan for our project. So it was unfortunately an all or nothing situation. We have learned that there's a party that's interested in purchasing that property and may be under contract in 60 days and may purchase it in 10 months. But as we know, those things there's a lot of maybes in there. So it became a situation that our client and our project could no longer wait, and ultimately the city understood that the fate of that intersection was too uncertain at this point, and staff felt that there was no way to create a safe intersection at this current time.
Okay, any other questions for the applicant? Okay, and you are in agreement with staff recommendations on this project?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have several speaker request forms that we will get through. We'll do them in order as they were received, not necessarily in order of favor or opposed. First up, we have Ryan Weed.
That's me.
Oh, sorry, Ryan. No. Okay. Wish to speak. Okay, we have several that do not wish to speak, and they are opposed. They are Chad and Lori Helmer, Philip Malai, sorry if I'm butchering your name, Jenny Mountain, Eric Mountain, Renee Fonnet, Susan Ocheltree, and Teresa Morgan. And none of them request to speak. Next up, we have Doug Dickerson. And please state your name and address for the record, please.
Yeah, Doug Dickerson, 8133 West Patrick Lane. First of all, I want to say I appreciate some of the changes that have been made based on past recommendations. My biggest concern is the amount of traffic that might go on Patrick Lane, and I saw some of the amendments. I was happy to hear that. Quite frankly, if it did go on Patrick Lane, it looked like there was recommendations to changing the road structure on Patrick Lane. I didn't see any room there for a horse trail. There's multiple horses that go down Patrick Lane. We have property, rural property on Patrick Lane for horses, and I didn't see any accommodation for that. and that concerned me. I saw accommodation for a nice sidewalk, but no horse trails, which that's the reason we bought in that area. That's why we have property there, and it is a rural county island, as you know. So that was one of the biggest concerns I have, is that there didn't seem to be any accommodation for that. Secondly, I am concerned with the amount of traffic. When I go out there, I'm out in front of my yard, I can go sometimes 20 minutes without seeing a car. As you know, I don't, the recent traffic studies I looked at, the average household individual, 3.8 times per day, leaving their house, going to their house, not including deliveries. Say that average house size is going to be 2 families or 2 individuals in that house. That's a lot of traffic down Patrick Lane that we're really, that was the reason we moved there, not to have heavy traffic. So although I appreciate that there's only one entrance for there right now, you know, I know you're talking about Williams. If you look at how close that well site is, that's not feasible to have traffic along there. It's too tight. I walk there all the time, so I don't know how that would work. So again, Patrick Lane, I really would prefer we don't have traffic down that lane. I think 77th Avenue was a great accommodation going north and hooking up to Pinnacle Peak. I would say possibly the same thing could happen on 79th through Pinnacle Peak. That's got a street light. Trying to get out in the morning to southbound going on 83rd Avenue is very difficult in the morning off of Patrick Lane. Again, adding more traffic to that would even compound that issue. That's all I really had. But again, I wanted to say I appreciate some of the accommodations that have been made. Obviously, they've listened to us in the past. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, next up, we have Jerry Moore. You can please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. My name's Jerry Moore. Address is 8005 West Patrick Lane. I want to open with thanking the parties for improving the proposal. It definitely is much better than what we had seen a couple of years back. One concern is the density of the property. It was a concern earlier, it's still a concern. Personally, between myself and my son-in-law and daughter, we've invested a lot of dollars and a lot of time and a lot of effort for improving our property. We own over 14 acres right now along Patrick Lane, adjacent to the property on 79th. So we have deep concerns about the density and what's going to happen to the values of the property. If you look around, I know you're comparing to the development to the south, Fletcher Heights, but if you look to the north and to the west, everybody that's involved there has large lots. We all are rural. You know, we bought a lifestyle 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and it's changing. And we know it's coming, and we know there's going to be property built there, but we were under the impression that we were going to get something like kind to what we own ourselves. You know, the lots are typically 1 acre or larger along the way. Our concerns are definitely traffic. Patrick Lane, you know, when we moved there, it was dirt road. Now it became paved, and now it's busy. With Casa de Sunrise opening up, it changed the landscape's changing. If we, you know, when the access and egress moved to 77th, that brought a smile to my face. But the possibility of Patrick Lane getting busier, it's going to be you know, it's going to be a little scary. Traffic. There's children. There's a school at 83rd and Pinnacle. There's kids walking, bicycling. There's moms driving in and out. We talk about the traffic pattern. What will happen? You know, the intersection of Pinnacle Peak and 83rd Avenue is a nightmare in the morning. It's also a nightmare in the afternoon with the children being picked up and the kids coming and going. There's safety issues. So there's more than just personal values. It's lifestyle issues. It's safety issues. There's a lot more to it. And I don't know that I know it's coming. I think we were all ready to accept a like density to what is currently to the west and north. But to this density is an improvement. like it much better than what we saw the first, but I still think there's room for improvement. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, next up, we have Jeff Fonnet. Jeff here? Oh, okay.
Hello.
Name and address for the record, please.
My address is 8119 West Daly.
Okay.
Yeah, several of the speakers that have already stood up have addressed the issue of the traffic. The other thing is, along Patrick, there are no sidewalks or anything of that nature on the south side of that road. And all that still belongs to the county. It doesn't belong to Peoria. So I'm just curious how safe that could be, traffic traveling back and forth. And I drive that road every day, and I see children up and down that road every day. My next concern was, I heard that the school districts gave a letter of or approved it, or a letter of recommendation for this. My wife's a school teacher. My son goes to Sunrise, my daughter goes to Sunrise. There are 4 major schools that dump into Sunrise. There is no way you're telling me that 300 plus individuals moving into the same neighborhood is not going to impact that area and make it more difficult for my kids and for the residents. So my wife wrote down something. She was curious, the possibility of the bridge from Pinnacle Peak and then cutting to the east over to Hillcrest. I remember that was something that was proposed at one time. So I was just curious if that could be brought up or addressed. And that's all I have for now. But thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and that was all of the forms that wish to speak. We did have one additional come in that was also opposed, Stacy Wise. Okay. Yeah. Okay, would the applicant like to respond?
Sure. I know, try to help address maybe or respond to some of the questions or comments. I think clearly we have shared in the adjacent residents' concerns regarding Patrick Lane. We understand Peoria's hands are somewhat tied relative to it being a county roadway. There was once upon a time when we were pursuing the entrance at Patrick Lane, given that's currently off the table, should additional right-of-way be granted by the property owner to the north at some point in the future, I would strongly recommend that the city consider some sort of pork chop or means at that intersection to funnel traffic to the north along 79th Avenue. That was in a concept that my design team had proposed once upon a time. Granted, that's off the table at this point, but that may help address some of the adjacent property owners' concerns along Patrick Lane. That reason being, when we looked at the number of homes, there's a number of lots that would be from 79th Avenue over to 83rd Avenue. I don't recall the count, but there was, well over probably 10 homes that would be passed by on the way to 83rd Avenue, whereas I believe there were only a handful of homes that would be driven past. It would be side yards passing on if traffic were to head north on 79th Avenue to Pinnacle Peak, similar to the current plan of heading north on 77th Avenue to Pinnacle Peak. There was a brief question regarding horse. We understand that the rural nature of the residents to the north and to the west is fairly probably heavily populated with horses as well. and horse access, ingress and egress over to New River Wash in one of our neighborhood meetings was brought up as a concern. And so if on the plan, it's fairly hard to see even from where I'm standing, but there is I think it's a purple line there that's designated probably as a multi-use trail. Our intent is that that trail would be available for walkers or, of course, equestrian users to make the connection from Patrick Lane and 79th Avenue across the northern boundary of our project to New River. And so here we'd be allowing access for the public within an HOA maintained corridor. So at no cost to the adjacent residents, they would be able to use and enjoy that as a connection and ultimately get to the New River Trail system or New River itself for equestrian use. There's consistently in neighborhood meetings, not only this forum, but neighborhood meetings in general, questions regarding home values and the perception that smaller lots equals reduced home values. And I would suggest that in this instance, I won't argue that when it comes to a 45-foot wide lot. Here we have lots that are significant size. And as noted, yes, we've come down in density, but all the while, the lots have continued to get larger and larger and larger. And the reason, as staff pointed out, we've asked for a higher lot coverage percentage is simply because the builders want to provide more single-story homes. That's what the buyers like, especially in this price point. And they also want to provide larger homes within the lot. And that helps them to build larger homes equates to a larger cost. And so even though these homes are going to be placed on lots that are smaller than the 1 acres and 3 acre lots immediately to the west, these homes will probably be larger in square footage than the majority of those homes that are existing or possibly would be constructed. Simply, if you have a large acre lot, you don't need a half an acre home. The buffer to the west, you'll notice that 79th Avenue was originally intended to connect from Patrick Lane south to Williams. As a part of our project, we petitioned and the city to remove the 79th Avenue as a collector roadway from the general plan. And that occurred, I believe, either as a minor or major, as a part of a major general plan update a couple of years ago. So those residents that are immediately to our west were previously looking at a roadway being constructed north-south there along our western boundary, their eastern boundaries. So we have, rather than place lots over that area, we've provided an additional buffer. So what was a street is now a landscape buffer that'll be owned and maintained by our homeowners association. So again, placing those, what is 6 lots on our western boundary, I count five homes on the county parcel. So even though they're on much larger lots, there's actually 5 residents to our west and 6 residents on our side. So we don't feel that that's a significant increase, or we feel that's a very compatible use. And frankly, we feel like that's us trying to be the best neighbor we can be. I'll take any additional questions you might have.
Okay, Commissioner Nelson.
Thank you for that added information. That was very helpful. You addressed the price point on these. I mean, home values, as you say, is always a concern. And if you can't speak to it, I understand, but do we know roughly what the price point on these homes is going to be?
I don't, unfortunately.
You can't speak to that at all?
No, I don't. It's simply, honestly, there are probably 3 or 4 home builders that are very interested in the project. They're not entry-level homes by any means. They're not entry-level home builders.
These aren't starter homes. These are going to be
Yes, sir.
larger square feet,
Yes.
upscale homes. Okay.
Yes, again, we wouldn't be asking for the 50% lot coverage if we weren't feeling like we needed it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I assume that the additional comment cards you had from people opposed were generally in the same neighborhood and same concerns. I was just curious if we could characterize what the people that didn't want to speak but were opposed. I'm assuming they were similar in nature to what we heard. I just
There were no details, just that they were opposed to the project.
Oh, no detail.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I did have from one of the speakers about his concerns about the school. My kids go to that school as well, and I can't imagine sticking one more neighborhood on this school. What, do we have the endorsement of the district available to us for review, or is that?
Chair Hutchinson, we do have the letter of support from the school district. I believe that's one of the exhibits in the staff report. Let me pull that up here to see which number that is
I'm
for
sorry,
you.
if it's in here, I just didn't see it.
It is towards the end. It is the exhibit, it's actually the very last, let's see. I apologize, I believe it's incorporated into the text of the report. The letter is fairly brief in nature and simply states that the school district has come to an agreement with the developer, and that they support this project. It doesn't provide any details regarding where students would attend or anything of that nature, simply their endorsement. So.
Okay. Okay, I am in agreement that the school is packed to the walls with students. I don't see it, but smarter people than me at the school district. Anything else for the, Commissioner Alsop?
Yeah, I wanted to add, I've done a lot of work in this area, financial underwriting, developing, and I've worked with the school districts in creating these developer assistance agreements and getting their approvals. And I can speak from experience that the school districts did not go easy on me when I was working on that with them. And if they are in agreement, then to me that's a significant, it shows that the developer has really worked with the school district to make sure that there's not going to be an undue burden. That's been my experience with the school districts, and the fact that they've received that approval from them is not insignificant to me.
Okay.
One brief comment, if I may. Sure. Obviously, we have still a significant runway ahead of us as far as construction plan preparation is concerned. You know, we would anticipate final plat sometime early in January of next year. And then we have approximately 12 months worth of construction. And that's just to get the roadways and streets in and get the site ready for home construction. Then, as you know, you're looking at approximately another 6 months, 8 months worth of home construction. So we're looking at roughly 2 years until someone's ready to move into the homes. And I would hope at that point, given the pressure that the school system's currently under, the district's under, that they would be able to help find solutions for some of the student problems they're dealing with.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, any other questions for the applicant? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing. So are there any additional comments or questions from the commissioners before we vote? Okay, do I have a motion on 4R? Commissioner Alsop.
I motion to approve, I don't have the case number in front of me. Is it this? Case number Z130008, item 4R.
Okay, we have a motion to, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, Commissioner Alsop moved and Commissioner Patterson seconded. Item 4RZ 13-0008, Hidden Paradise Estates. Would you everyone please vote?
Chair Hutchinson, it may be appropriate if the commission intends to recommend approval as indicated with the conditions modified. It may be appropriate to indicate if it's subject to the conditions as modified.
The modified conditions. Is that a part of your motion?
Yes, so I motion to approve item 4RZ13008 with the proposed amended conditions. Is that what you're looking for? Thanks.
Is that better? And we still have a second?
Second.
Okay. Would everyone please vote? Okay, and it passes unanimously. Next up is item 5R, study session. This is not for a public hearing. This is for discussion only. This is for TA 17-01, wireless communication facility text amendment.
Thank you, Commissioner Hutchinson, members of the commission. My name is Cody Gleason. I'm a senior planner with the City of Peoria Planning and Community Development Department. Unfortunately, this item is probably not as exciting as the other one, so I hope to provide some information for you. What we're looking at is really a holistic change to the wireless communication facility ordinance that we have currently within the city zoning ordinance. This is a city-initiated text amendment. Really, there's a few purposes behind that text amendment, one of which just being ease and usability of the ordinance. Currently, it's very verbose, shall we say, very informative, detailed, however, not necessarily formatted in a nature that's conducive to a customer reading that particular ordinance for their purposes. Additionally, we're hoping to respond to just massive demand for wireless communications facilities on a very consistent basis. On a very consistent basis, we're receiving requests for new facilities all the time, as well as what's being called small cells. Small cells are not a part of this amendment. Those proceed through a different process. This is solely for wireless communication facilities on private property. Our current ordinance has been in place since 1998. It's like I said, very informative, very comprehensive, but over that span of time, there's been an inordinate number of changes in not only technology, but also terminology and what's necessary in order to regulate these types of facilities moving forward. The current ordinance, because it attempts to address a great deal of information, is somewhat redundant in the information that's provided. The way that it's organized has general requirements in several portions of the ordinance, as well as specific guidelines. So we saw opportunities to alleviate some of that redundancy and, again, try and make it user-friendly and easy to navigate. Currently, the standards are not reflective of some of the most recent changes within the Federal Communications Commission order and their requirements and regulations for wireless facilities and what municipalities can and cannot regulate. Currently, the ordinance is 6 pages long, not including definitions. So it's very text-heavy for what could be a condensed, user-friendly format. There's no representative images, and the phraseology is rather confusing due to the amount of exceptions and general provisions that are incorporated within subsections. So there's a tendency to get lost in what you're reviewing when you're reviewing it. You can see here an illustration kind of how technology and cell phones in particular have progressed over the years. A key takeaway from this would be that kind of giant brick you see in the center there in 1993. And the the calculator-esque flip phone there in 2000. In between those two is when really the crux of our ordinance was adopted, and we incorporated many of the regulations that we still have today. So As you can see, beyond that 2000 image, there's been significant progression in technology and capabilities of those phones, which has required an abundant increase in the demand for wireless communication facilities to really convey the signal and data that we all look for in our wireless devices. As I mentioned, really what we're looking for here with this kind of comprehensive look at the wireless ordinance is improving efficiency, providing ease of the user to review it, and again, really focusing on ensuring that we are compliant with those revisions to FCC regulations and FCC orders. Here's somewhat of a representative graphic of what we tried to do with the ordinance. You can see on the left, we had previously really 3 categories with the wireless ordinance: principally permitted, conditionally permitted, and general standards. Within principally permitted, as well as within conditionally permitted, we again had general standards. So there's that overlap that you see in the left side of the graphic. We tried to synthesize that down and really focus on appropriate organization of the ordinance. As a result, we came up with general requirements that, obviously, as the name would indicate, are generally applicable to all wireless facilities. And then moving on, rather than having principally permitted and conditionally permitted as their own categories, we felt it appropriate to place those under development standards. So really, when a user is looking at the ordinance, they know immediately what they need to look at in order to identify what they can construct their facility to. Following that, we incorporated an administrative procedures section. The purpose of this section is somewhat twofold. We wanted to clarify the process for each category. So for conditionally permitted and for principally permitted, we want to identify that path moving forward. But also in regards to those federal regulations that I was referencing, we wanted to incorporate standards that complied with those federal regulations. And the key point of those particular regulations were what constitutes a quote-unquote substantial change to the facility. We'll get into that a little bit further here in the presentation. The last item you see there is exemptions to the ordinance itself. Exemptions for items like routine maintenance, if a provider is going out there to ensure cable connections and/or replace malfunctioning devices, we didn't want to have to require them to go through the full planning process. Additionally, the exemptions include, again, what we'll get to here regarding substantial change. So items deemed not a substantial change would be exempt from the what would otherwise be the requirements. As I mentioned, one of the key changes is trying to improve the usability of the ordinance and what the reader is conveyed when they're looking at the ordinance, how they understand it. You know, you hear the adage, a picture is worth 1,000 words. In reviewing text, no matter how much you simplify it or try and explain it, a picture is always going to help with that representation. So what we tried to provide here, in addition to the definitions, was just a representation of some of the terms referenced in those definitions. So you see the pole height, the ground equipment enclosure, the face of antenna width, aerial mounted equipment. These are all items that are referenced in the development standards, so we wanted to ensure that everyone was on the same page when we're reviewing this with customers and applicants that are coming in. So here we have an example of our current development standards. This is simply for permitted principal use. As you can see, it's a lot of text to read through. As I mentioned, it tried to be very comprehensive, almost too much so in that you're wondering when you read through a section, if you miss something, you need to go back, or even in the same paragraph, if you miss too many exceptions and you're not understanding it. Our hope was to revise this to simplify it down and convey a clear message that conveyed all of this and didn't leave anything out, but still made it easier to read. What we came up with for that section was this. We felt it worked a little bit better. You got a little bit less to read. And really, it makes it simpler for, to be honest with you, not only customers, but staff. Having to read through all that text every time we got one in, I myself would have to go back and reread sections. So we tried to simplify and show clearly, when you're developing at this size in this district, these are your requirements. When you're developing at this size, these are your requirements. And then some of the key items that we added to the ordinance were items like the antenna distance from poles. So that's where you see the width measurement and the identification of the aerial mounted equipment. We put a cap on that for principally permitted to ensure that when we're evaluating something, they're not going an extensive amount beyond what would be typically necessary. But we also still wanted to provide for appropriate regulation wherever we could. A lot of the items that are contained within here, as I mentioned, are similar to the prior ordinance regulations with some modifications, some particular modifications with respect to distance to residential property. There was an increase there for sites located on non-residential property. The reason being, we felt an increase in that height on a commercial property. It was appropriate to further step that back from a residential property. And we came up with that number just as an approximate increase in the height. We tried to approximate that increase in the distance from residential property to kind of make a proportionate ratio. So substantial change, what does that mean? We read through a 155-page FCC order to figure that out. It's not the most interesting read, but it's quite substantial. In there, it identifies what constitutes a substantial change with respect to not only the height of the tower, but also the width of the array. So within that FCC order, it identifies that an increase by more than 20 feet or 10%, whichever is greater, in height is deemed a substantial change. So what does that mean for looking at a facility? Anything that increases the height under 20 feet and or at 20 feet would be permitted to proceed without going through another planning process. It would simply be able to apply for appropriate building permits, whether that's electrical or if they need to make modifications to ensure appropriate footing and everything. That substantial change also referenced width. So again, a facility would be able to increase the width of the array, essentially from the pole to the face of the antenna, by 20 feet without going through those planning processes. It seems like a rather substantial increase. That is kind of one of those reasons that we wanted to evaluate the width as a starting point from the pole to the face of the antenna, and that's why we put that cap in there for principally permitted uses to ensure that it's not overly cumbersome should they come in for a non-substantial width expansion. Again, these regulations were in response to Federal Communications Commission regulations and orders as to what was deemed a substantial change and what was allowed if it was not and/or was a substantial change. The purpose behind their order and regulations is really to allow for the expedient rollout of facilities throughout the country to ensure that cellular service is provided appropriately, be it for communications or safety purposes throughout the country. Here we have kind of a graphical representation, similar to, as I mentioned, pictures worth 1,000 words. So you can see here, at least in relation to the initially approved facility, what an increase of 20 feet in height would look like and what that would represent in a change to the facility. Here, you'll see what would represent a 20-foot increase in the width of a facility for the antenna array from the pole to the face of the antenna. I wasn't able to stretch the graphic and have it look well, so I just wanted to provide you a rectangle there. Again, overall, the objectives of this city-initiated code amendment are to produce contextually appropriate regulations, not only for staff reviewing the items, but also for the end user, the wireless customer, and the general public as well. If they have questions, they have a relatively easy read, hopefully with the proposed ordinance versus the current format. Again, a reduction in the duplication of regulations really aids in that ease of use and the kind of high point concern of ensuring that we are compliant and conforming to FCC regulations and orders. As referenced, this is a study session item, so we're not requesting any recommendation from you at this point in time. We're simply here to convey our proposal to you and garner any comments or questions that you may have in regards to the proposed ordinance. Our continuing efforts with this ordinance would be September 21st. We plan to return to you for a recommendation that would be taken to City Council. And then October 17th, we are slated for a City Council study session on this item. And with that, if you have any questions, I'd take them at this time.
So I have a quick question. So with the, would any of these text amendments or the ordinance overall, is it subject to FCC review?
I would have to defer that to the city attorney. We would simply have to ensure that any regulations we do implement are compliant with their orders, but I'm not sure if they end up reviewing it. Okay.
Oh, they are? Yes, okay. Any other, Commissioner Nelson?
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'm a big believer in less is more, and you certainly accomplished that here. This is
that was our hope.
Outstanding work, so appreciate that when we can simplify that. Just a few questions here. So what was the process, or did we seek public input from the mobile communication providers on this? What was that process like?
Sure. So initially, kind of what we do with every text amendment is look at other cities and evaluate what is everyone else doing. You know, we don't want to be the outlier. You want to be first in a good way, but you certainly don't want to be first if you're wrong. So we wanted to ensure that we're not necessarily mirroring them, but ensuring a consistency in our regulations. So after evaluating other city standards, we tried to reflect what we saw there, but also what we wanted to see here. So not necessarily taking those standards. With that in mind, we also sent it out to a few frequent flyers that are applicants with wireless facilities to try and garner their feedback and see if they felt any of the items would be an impediment to anything that they would end up proposing. We did get a few comments back. They were rather limited in scope. Particularly, they were focused on wireless facilities that are essentially attaching to buildings. We had some items and regulations in the ordinance that reflected a prohibition against anything other than a really minor change to the building in order to accommodate that. In their response, they identified that that was too minor of a change to allow. It wouldn't allow their appropriate rollout of their facilities. So we tried to find an appropriate middle ground that would allow for screening for them when placing on a building, but also not overly cumbersome.
So as far as the public input, really that's what this forum is, what you're envisioning, city council meeting, planning and zoning. We're really hoping if there are people who feel strongly, they'll show up for these meetings.
Chairman, Commissioner Hutchinson, that's correct. We're hoping to get it out in this manner. The only real other manner that we would have would be an exhaustive mailing to the entire city, which doesn't tend to facilitate appropriate conversation about it. So we wanted to try and garner appropriate comments and see what feedback we could implement into the code.
I appreciate that. May I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Obviously, I'm thinking of all the contentious wireless communication facilities that we've encountered, and if you haven't yet, brace yourself. Certainly, the first thing we like to ask, as you know, is there an opportunity to co-locate on another tower nearby so we don't have to put up a new one? How will these regulations encourage those folks to look for co-location opportunities? Is that a discussion that happens before? Do we need to put it in print?
Certainly, Chairman, Commissioner Nelson, the focus of this, aside from the aforementioned items, was to kind of boil everything down. We implemented regulations that try and incentivize co-location.
Okay.
So, and also with the substantial change regulations, that kind of facilitates and prioritizes co-location over new site development. The issue that we often run into with new development sites is that they're looking for a specific location from their RF engineers to ensure their network provides service to everyone in a particular area. So oftentimes you'll find, Verizon can't necessarily co-locate on T-Mobile because they already have a facility that covers the area where the T-Mobile site is, so they might have to adjust their location to accommodate it. It's always our goal to minimize the impact, and that's what we tried to focus on in those development standards that we implemented into the proposed ordinance.
Okay, that makes sense. And just a last question. And I hope I read this right. Are we requiring all, perhaps not with rooftop and building mounted, but correct me, are we requiring all wireless communication facilities to be concealed? Is that how I read this?
So principally permitted facilities would be required to be concealed.
Okay.
The reason being, if they are not able to be concealed, or if there's some purpose behind no concealment, we wanted to require that to go through a conditional use permit to ensure that we, again, have additional public input and we have more of an interaction to ensure it's an appropriate site and an appropriate plan for that particular site.
And does the city have so if a T-Mobile comes to you or a representative for T-Mobile comes and says, we want to put a wireless communication facility, we want it to look like a pine tree, and there's not a pine tree within 10 miles of that area, there's lots of saguaros, and we say, do we have the ability through this, or is this the staff's prerogative where we could say, no, it's going to be a saguaro cactus because that's the predominant vegetation in the area?
So what we had or at least what we have in the existing ordinance is an identification of what an alternate facility is. We don't say that that alternate facility, for instance, a monopine or monopalm, as you're referencing, we don't say that that has to be in the area of another pine tree, another palm tree. We've implemented that in practice, trying to ensure that they're only located in appropriate areas to where they don't stand out, because really the desire behind a stealth design is to have it be stealth. We don't want it sticking out. So within the definitions portion of some of the changes, we've identified that it would be, I'm forgetting the particular phrasing that we use, but in areas that are populated with those types of vegetation. So if it's a monopalm, it has to be in the area of palm trees. If it's a monopine, it has to be in the area of pine trees. It has to be representative of its area if it's going to be a stealth facility.
Perfect, thank you, appreciate that. That's all.
Yes, as referenced, pictures always help. So we wanted to make sure and incorporate those. Again, to kind of show what we're looking for with a stealth facility. When you have a palm tree and the antenna sticks out 40 feet beyond the fronds, it doesn't really work. With another item that I may have neglected to mention, when it's a stealth facility, and this is a part of the FCC regulations that they allow us to regulate, if it is a stealth facility and if those non-substantial changes would impact the stealth of that facility, then it's no longer a non-substantial change. It, at that point, becomes a substantial change and is subject to our planning review process.
Thank you, Mr. Gleason.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, this being a study session, the next opportunity for public input will be on September 21st at the regular Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Okay, we will move on now to item 6R, study session TA 16-001, sign code modernization project. And before we get started with staff, I know we had a few, looks like a couple of speaker requests on this subject. You will be afforded the opportunity during call to the public, since this is only a study session item. Okay, with that, staff, you can start your report.
Thank you, Chair Hutchinson, members of the commission. Much like the last item, this is a study session. So we are providing this presentation this evening as an informational opportunity, as well as a time for discussion with the commission. This is a complete rewrite of the city sign code, so it is fairly in-depth. So we thought it best to give plenty of time to kind of absorb all of the new changes. So starting with that, this is also a city-initiated amendment. So staff has been working on this for approximately the past almost 2 years now. And as I mentioned, it is a comprehensive amendment to the sign code, essentially replacing the existing sign code with a brand-new ordinance. We had several goals with this change: increasing the legal enforceability of sign regulations, enhancing the user-friendliness, much like the wireless section, but probably even more so, the sign code was not the most user-friendly document. We also want to maintain and promote a high-quality aesthetic environment in the city, and balance an atmosphere that increases the efficacy of messages, and balancing permanent and temporary signs. So we're looking to kind of balance all of the needs of the city's residents, businesses, and hopefully create an environment where all of those can coexist well. So the current sign code, again, very much like the wireless, has not been comprehensively changed since 1989. Over the years, there have been many amendments tacked on to the code, but it hasn't been overhauled. So we're dealing with, many of similar problems. The terminology is outdated and doesn't match the industry. The sign standards are not content neutral, which we'll get into with the Reed v. Town of Gilbert case. In addition, this section was 48 pages long, so you can imagine how difficult it is for someone who's not familiar with the code to find the section that they need. They may have to turn to page 20 for part of their regulations, turn to page 45 for the other half of their regulation, and hopefully make their way back in order to be able to figure out the process that they need. It was very dense in terms of text and contained over 33 different sign types. So folks often had trouble determining which category their potential sign would fall into. One of the things that we had to deal with, as mentioned, was the Reed v. Town of Gilbert Supreme Court decision. That decision, which came out in 2015, required that signs have that content neutrality be in place. The short of that is that basically, this is the simplified, that you can't read the sign to enforce the code. So basically, we're not differentiating based on the message portrayed in the sign. However, there were a number of things that the Supreme Court said we could still regulate, including safety, aesthetics or appearance, the size of the sign, the building materials, if the sign is illuminated or not, if the sign has pieces that move, or if it is a portable sign, or if it's a permanent, maintained in place. So that was the Supreme Court decision that came down affecting cities across the country. So lots of municipalities are modifying their sign codes to meet that need, in addition to the issues that we were already dealing with in terms of the outdatedness of our code. One of the things that was thrown in after the Reed v. Town of Gilbert decision is the state attorney general issued an opinion based on some unique challenges that Arizona faces. The Arizona revised statutes includes language that requires city to allow political signs in the right-of-way during a political season. The attorney general's opinion was that the Supreme Court decision did not affect ARS for this statute. So staff has worked to meet the needs both of the Supreme Court decision as well as existing ARS statutes. A full draft has been provided for you today. However, we'll be hitting on the highlights and the key changes that we believe in terms of sign types are likely to be most of interest both to the commission as well as to the folks who are putting those signs in place. So as mentioned, in our modernization approach, we've significantly reduced the text, reduced the number of sign types, utilized a chart and matrix format wherever possible for easy reference, and added a number of graphics and illustrations. We've made it easy to find the permit requirements, as you can see on the upper right-hand side of the graphic, so that folks can immediately determine if a permit is required or not. The example graphics help familiarize users with our sign types, providing one more way that folks can easily find what they need and understand what applies to their situation. While all of our signs are message neutral, the graphics are simply representative. So we may refer to something and you may see an illustration, however, that does not determine the actual content of the sign. It could be used to display a different type of message. All of the signs, as I mentioned, are message neutral. However, commercial and non-commercial speech can be treated differently. So you will see some examples within the code where those two forms of speech are treated in different ways. Non-commercial speech is required to be more heavily protected, while commercial speech can have further regulation placed on it. First, we'll discuss some of the the biggest ticket items in terms of temporary signs, those signs that are not intended to remain in place on a permanent basis. So, as I mentioned, our state revised statutes do have very specific implications for how political signs can be treated. We are required to allow political signs in the right-of-way at least 60 days prior to the primary election and 15 days after the general election. City Council had previously decided to extend this time frame to 90 days prior to the primary election. That's what's in our current code. Since we cannot consider the content of the sign during this time frame, all political signs and all non-commercial signs, messages, must be allowed in the right-of-way. So that means that if someone wishes to have a sign that says "Save the Whales" or has another ideological message, it would be permitted within the right-of-way during this time frame. It would have to meet the same size and height requirements and other limitations for placement in terms of safety, so not being placed in a visibility triangle near an intersection or other hazardous places. With that, you can see that we do have different size and height requirements that are very similar to the existing regulations. The main primary change is in the height, a reduction from 8 feet to 7 feet. This is for consistency with the rest of our temporary signs. The city building code has gone into place to require a permit for any sign that is taller than 7 feet in height. Maintaining the maximum of 7 feet will ensure that because these signs do not require sign permits, they will also not require building permits. So that's the main reason for that change and that slight limitation. So you'll see across the board, all of our temporary signs, we're going to a maximum height of 7 feet to eliminate that building permit need. The city also has a sports complex commercial tourism zone. So the ARS allowed an exemption area so that the city can determine a certain zone that would not have signs within the right-of-way. And as noted in the name, essentially these would be areas where the city may expect tourism and where the presence of the signs in the right-of-way may prove an undue burden. The next sign type that we'll discuss are resident right-of-way signs. This is an entirely new sign type. It doesn't match any of the categories we have today. It's really the city's best way to identify some of those types of signs that are very typical in residential neighborhoods and occur on a regular basis now, and incorporate those into a sign that's permitted in the right-of-way for limited duration. This may most closely be associated with our temporary event signs now, but it's not a direct match by any means. Some of the things this could be used for would be yard sales, open houses, or other times where folks may wish to direct individuals to their home. So if they're having a large gathering or some other reason that they need to direct traffic in their neighborhood for a limited duration. These signs would be allowed currently they're allowed based on the event itself. We can no longer look at what it says on the sign, so we wouldn't know when the event is occurring. As a result, we're allowing these signs for 4 days per time, up to 4 times per year. That would be consistent with when as many yard sales as would be allowed, or if someone were to be having their home up for sale, they could utilize that for multiple open houses. The signs, they could have up to 4 per instance. So if they had one occasion of a yard sale or an open house, they could have up to 4 signs at that time for the 4 days per instance. These would be allowed on residential roads, so they would be contained within residential neighborhoods and would not be permitted along commercial development right-of-ways. So these would not be the signs that you see along Bell Road, in front of the commercial shopping centers. That would be outside of the scope of what is permitted with this sign type. And speaking of which, they would not require a permit. We know that the residents look to do these events quickly, and that the permit was considered something that would be very difficult to enforce and difficult to ensure that residents were aware of. So staff has worked to remove that permit requirement. Yard signs are another type of sign on premise that is very common. We understand that folks have various reasons that they may want to place a small sign in their yard for a limited time frame, whether it's because they're having landscaping work done, having a pool constructed, if they're having a birthday or special occasion that someone wants to recognize and celebrate. So this sign type would allow a sign to be placed for up to 3 months at a time. It could be replaced with a different sign after that point, but the timing allows that because these are temporary in nature and are not constructed to be infinitely durable in the Arizona sun, that same sign is not out there in poor condition. So it creates a break. The size and height is a maximum of 3 feet in height and 3 square feet in area, so these are very small signs, and only one would be permitted. These would be allowed on developed residential lots, so the expectation is this is what you might see in someone's front yard in a neighborhood. The next type of sign is for undeveloped property. There are undeveloped property sign regulations for both large and small parcels. The regulations you see here are for parcels larger than 1 acre. While any message could be provided, this is something that may be used to accommodate what's currently considered off-site subdivision advertising. The way that this regulation is formatted is that it provides signage rights to the undeveloped property itself. Unlike our current off-site subdivision advertising, which grants the ability to have a sign to the builder within a subdivision. So this is actually giving that right to have a sign to the undeveloped property owner and allowing them to place the message that they'd like, or to contract with a home builder if the home builder would like to place a message on their site. The signs will be permitted for 1 year at a time and could be renewed for up to 3 years total, very similar to the off-site subdivision advertising today. So this recognizes that there may be a need for a somewhat longer duration than the smaller temporary signs, but by having that renewal process, we verify that the sign is still in good condition and that there are no safety hazards present. As mentioned, it's no longer tied to a recorded subdivision. One of the benefits of this is that currently, if there are multiple builders within a subdivision, if we've got 3 builders sharing a subdivision, there's only 2 signs that they can have for that subdivision. So somebody is the odd man out. The way that this regulation is formatted, it would be up to a home builder or any other user to go out and contact the property owners of these undeveloped properties to lease with them. So it really provides the opportunity for someone to be a go-getter and to be able to place their signage where they would like without a strict limitation from the city. Instead, we're limiting the amount of signage on the parcel. For parcels over 1 acre, they would be given 1 sign allowance, and then for every additional 600 linear feet of frontage, so if you've got a multiple block long property, you'd have the ability to have another sign. What this also considers is a separation requirement. So we understand that right now that there are a number of signs, both legal and illegally placed, that are very close, they're very clustered together at major intersections, and they're creating a visual, an unseemly visual condition. Not the appearance that the city is interested in maintaining. So this code proposes having a minimum of 100-foot separation between other signs of this type. So that gives a little bit of spacing so that they're not on top of each other. It also ensures that the messages are better able to be read, particularly on higher speed roads. The next type of temporary sign we have are A-frame signs. And while they're called A-frame signs, they may also take the form of an H-frame sign, or as you see, so basically the small portable signs, as you can see in the image to the right. So the A-frame is representative of what they take, but doesn't define the design of the sign. Our current regulations allow A-frame signs through a special event sign permit 4 times per year, up to 30 days per event. So it is limited in duration. The size is a maximum of 3 feet in height and 6 square feet in area. What we're looking to maintain is to essentially keep the same regulations for special events as a special promotion. Again, it's not related, it doesn't require an event, it doesn't require a particular activity to occur. They could put whatever message on the sign they'd like, but to continue that and add an additional category. What we heard from some concerns regarding businesses was that there were needs to have these type of small signs on a daily basis, whether it's to post daily specials, menus, other activities and promotions that are occurring, particularly for our small businesses, that are ongoing. So we're looking at the ability, and what you'll see in your code is actually currently proposed for Old Town. But through further discussion, we would look to have that actually go citywide. This would be a little bit different than the special event or special promotions, in that those signs can actually go, if you're in a large commercial center, they can be pushed towards the right-of-way, still on site, but up towards the street. With this new A-frame sign, those would be kept close to the business entrance, so potentially within 8 feet of the business entry, similar to what we allow for outdoor display. So right now we allow outdoor display during business hours. If someone has merchandise that they'd like to place out in front of their suite or their building, they can do that as long as they maintain within 8 feet and that they do not block pedestrian or vehicular visibility or circulation. So looking to continue those limitations for safety and access concerns, we would have that allowance so that folks and businesses could have this type of additional signage on a daily basis, bring it in when their business closes at the end of the day. Vehicle signs are a type of sign that's a little bit different in that they are currently prohibited with certain exceptions. Right now, all vehicle signs are prohibited except for business vehicles. The business vehicles have to be in a parking space. It has to be in a assigned parking space, at least 15 feet from the right-of-way. However, what we've seen in practice is all of our current developments require a 15-foot landscape buffer at least, which means that essentially a vehicle could be placed right outside of the right-of-way, immediately behind the screen wall, as you see in the picture on the top right. That it currently meets the requirements in many aspects of the code. And so it, as you can see, has even been tagged. It is not something that is serving as an operable or a vehicle that is part of the daily actions of the business. So what we're looking with our proposed regulation is a little different from the current code. We're looking to continue the prohibition on vehicle signs with an exception for vehicles consistently used in the normal daily conduct of business. So that phrasing is intended to indicate that this is not something that simply has a business logo on it and therefore is a business vehicle, but rather that it is actually used, whether it's for delivery, whether it's used by employees for transport or other possibilities, but simply that it's a vehicle that's actually being used as a vehicle and not as a sign. With that, the limitations that are proposed are that the vehicle be placed and parked where it is either A, not visible from the right-of-way. So for instance, if there are parking spaces behind a building, which is often common in large commercial centers, or if that is not the case and there's no parking that is concealed from the right-of-way, that it's parked as far away from the right-of-way as feasible. So this, again, is intended to move those vehicles back away from the right-of-way so that they can serve as vehicles and not as signs. We're not trying to discourage businesses that use their vehicles dual purpose while they're in transport or while they're serving their business needs, but simply ensure that they are not essentially taking the way of the monument sign along the street frontage. Moving on to permanent signs, our first type are building signs. So right now, we allow building wall signs and awning signs separately with their own allotments. What we look to do is say that, really businesses have a variety of business needs. They know what their business and their location needs are better than the city does, and we've created a bucket. So they will have a signage allotment for these two sign types to use as makes most sense for their business, whether awning signs are maybe a key focus for them or wall signs. We've also increased the allotment from 1.5 square feet per linear foot of street frontage of the business to 2. So it's a little bit extra signage, about 33% for some of the businesses, and it really is just a little bit of extra boost so that folks can place signage on the various elevations of their building as they see fit. We're also specifically and clearly allowing some of the more creative installations of signage. So the images that you see on the lower right, where there are signs that are on the end of a canopy, are kind of resting above the canopy. Right now, those aren't specifically permitted, and we wanted to make sure that we're encouraging those more attractive and interesting forms of signage that are being used today. We've also implemented a projecting sign type. So projecting signs are signs attached to a building that stick out more than 14 inches from the building. Right now, those are not allowed at all. What we're proposing is that they be allowed because these are often pedestrian-oriented signs. Again, they add interest to the street frontage, and they are often most appropriate, whether it is under a pedestrian walkway or other signs that can add to the unique character of an area. With those, we have minimum requirements to ensure that there is safety, that the sign is both high enough above the sidewalk as well as a maximum size so that it's not creating any type of hazard, but that it's just creating another option for advertising purposes. Freestanding monument signs are a sign type that we currently allow, but in a one-size-fits-all sort of format. Right now, with very few exceptions, all of the freestanding monument signs have the same height and dimensions, regardless of the size of the center that they're located in. Most of our planned area developments are large commercial PADs, have allowances for signs that are outside of our current scope, because if you're a large commercial center at Lake Pleasant and Happy Valley, for instance, there's no way that having one monument sign on Happy Valley and one on Lake Pleasant would serve the needs of all of the tenants or provide access for individuals looking to see where their businesses that they're turning into are located. So the proposed regulation looks at a hierarchy with larger, taller signs permitted on higher speed roadways and for those centers and properties that have larger frontages. With that hierarchy, we still have smaller signs permitted for those smaller centers so that everyone has some type of signage permitted. And we've also created the internal monument sign so that if you have an individual parcel that is located internal to a center, that they still have the ability to place signage, whether it's for directing folks to a drive-through, providing a very small monument to identify their particular business, or any other purpose that they would see fit. Right now, we have already identified Bell Road and Grand Avenue as higher speed roadways, higher traffic roadways for larger signs. This regulation continues that, but also includes our parkways and also identifies that major arterials, aside from just the Bell Road, are also appropriate to have a little bit larger and taller signs on. So really, this is just a graduated scale so that the bigger the site, the higher speed the road, the higher classification, the larger and more signs that are permitted in scale with the context. To get to these numbers, we've looked at a number of our planned area developments that have those modified standards, and we also took examples of existing commercial centers to physically try to lay out how many driveways they may have, how many signs would be appropriate, and to get a sense of what spacing would make sense for a commercial center. So we did try to really look practically at what would make sense on the whole. So freeway signs are a little bit of the larger version of a freestanding sign, but are only located along our Loop 101 and 303 freeways at this point, and any other freeways that the city should choose to designate in the future. Our regulations are being maintained fairly similarly, with allowances for slightly taller and slightly larger signs, as well as reducing the minimum frontage that's required in order to have allowance for a freeway sign. So right now, if you have a site that's adjacent to the freeway, but it doesn't have basically a quarter mile of frontage, you can't have a freeway sign. We've reduced that number almost in half, basically. So looking at the number and saying, we've got a lot of sites along the freeways today that are developed that can't have freeway signs, and because they're all small, none of them have any signage along the freeway. And so we looked at that number and said, really, the 660, you're still looking at a couple of blocks. So it's not as though these signs are on top of each other. There's still minimum separation requirements, both between the signs themselves as well as separation from residential property. So there are protections in place to ensure that they're not cluttered, but we're just looking to allow them a little bit closer together. And in terms of the size of the signs, this is consistent with existing PAD freestanding or freeway signs that we have regulations in place for today. So the 250 square feet is a slight increase, but is consistent with other development. So as I mentioned, this has been really a two-year process. We started at the beginning, and we've had a lot of public outreach along the way and engagement to see what the regulated community, as well as businesses, residents, what ideas they may have regarding the sign code. So to give you a sense of scale, we have about 400 sign permits that are requested a year. With that, what we initially did at the outset of the process was take and pull all of the contact information from, at first, 6 months of sign permits, whether that be the applicant, if they had a company, if it was a business owner, anyone who had given us contact information in the form of an email address, pulled all of those emails and contacted that entire group to reach out to them to see if they would like to be involved in this process. And we also encouraged them to forward this information on to others, whether it be other individuals in their organization or contacts that they may have, folks that they thought would be interested in being engaged in the process. So we tried to get the word out to as many people as possible. As a result of that initial contact, we were able to create a list of stakeholders, people who had expressed interest in being involved. With that group, we held 2 stakeholder meetings to introduce them to the concept, as well as to get feedback on specific draft regulations that had been crafted. We also reached out and had meetings with local groups of locals and with industry representatives who we knew would be impacted by the proposed regulation, whether they were in the sign industry, in the home building industry, folks who are involved in various aspects that we tend to come in contact with sign permits. We also received feedback from both local and national groups, other interest groups, including the real estate community. So our interaction, we started with emails. We kind of broadcast out on the city's main website or main webpage, as well as our planning website, providing updates, holding those in-person meetings. There was coverage through the local newspapers. And as well, when we had folks come into the counter for sign permits, our staff for the past 2 years has been letting them know that this process was underway and trying to get them to, let them know that they could be part of it, or let them know what the potential regulations might be coming forward to, really just get out the word as much as possible. Knowing that folks are busy, we did have individuals attend the stakeholder meetings, but we also did continue through with the email, sending out the drafts, so that if people preferred to provide contact or input through emails back, that was an option for them. And we did receive feedback from several individuals by email, and obviously that's a good way to provide really detailed, line item contact, as opposed to just talking through generalities in a meeting. So in summary, our new draft sign code proposal is content neutral. We've reclassified the signs and renamed and reframed them to be located or specific to the locations, the placement, the characteristics of the signs themselves instead of the content on them. We've reduced the words in this code almost to 1/3 of the original, so it's a lot less wordy. The pages it's actually less than half the size, which is great for anyone who's trying to carry around the code or read through it. And we've also reduced the number of types of signs, in addition to changing them so they are more specific and there's less overlap in the types. And we've increased the type of signs that do not require a permit. So looking at any opportunity where we could safely and effectively have a sign with regulations that didn't require individuals to come in and have a permit issued from the city. And we've also created those new sign options, like the projecting signs and the signs on the awning faces or canopy faces. So moving forward, you will see this again. We're first going to a City Council study session on September 19th, And then we expect to, depending on feedback from the City Council, come back to this commission on October 5th for a recommendation. So hopefully the discussion we've had this evening, or the presentation, has provided a little bit of background, so that when we come back to you for a recommendation, we won't be starting from scratch, and hopefully that will give you some time to have kind of mull over the regulations that we're proposing. And then finally, we would look to go back potentially to City Council October 17th, so that the code could be potentially effective before the end of the year. So, and with that, I'd be happy to take any questions you may have.
Commissioner Nelson.
Thank you. Very great report. A lot to digest there. I wish our format allowed to ask questions as we're going along here, so forgive me. I'm going to kind of, can we back up through your kind of start at the beginning? I have questions along the way here.
Sure.
Starting with the temporary event slide. Yeah, that one right there. So just a clarification question. So on the 4 times per year, I think you mentioned in that category an open house event for a home. So we have some higher end homes that probably take months to sell. Does this forbid them from having more than 4 open houses for that home then? They can do maximum of 4? Even if it takes them a year to sell the home, they do, like, just have to plan one every 3 months, or?
Commissioner Nelson, this wouldn't prohibit them from having additional open houses. It would simply limit the number of signs that could be placed in the right-of-way. And this was one of those balancing acts that we had to come up with the understanding that there's a need to place signage in the right-of-way. However, balancing that with the issue of sign clutter, because the other thing we heard was that in addition to the need for these types of signs, there was concern in neighborhoods that these type of signs get placed and tend to be up and down a street and in profuse amounts that are not conducive to their personal enjoyment of their home.
Definitely agree with
So this
that.
was kind of a balance that we got to see, try to have everyone have a little bit of something.
Huh, okay, thank you for that. On the yard signs, I had a question on that as well. So this pertains to developed lots.
Correct.
So how do we define developed lot? Is that an owner-occupied home? Is that, tell me your thoughts on that. Just-
Commissioner Nelson, this is intended for a lot that has a home on it. So if it is a vacant lot that has not had construction occur, that would be what's considered an undeveloped lot. If it is developed, it would mean that it essentially has a permitted principal use, whether that be a home or the few other uses that we allow in residential areas. So this is a residential lot as opposed to a bare piece of dirt.
So a home that's brand new under construction would not be considered a developed residential lot? Not until it's completed?
Correct. And now, Commissioner Nelson, these were the highlights, so it certainly didn't cover all of the sign types that are
Yeah, I
proposed. So there are allowances for construction. So in some of those special categories, the times where there's something else going on, we have allowances for construction signs. We also have allowances for signs for properties that are offered for sale, lease, or rent. So what you've seen here is kind of the sprinkling of the sign types that we've heard the most interest about, but there are other signs proposed that are consistent to accommodate the other things that typically occur.
Well, I'll tell you where my question's coming from is, so I'm building a new home and I'm having the pool put in at the same time. Is that going to be forbidden to do? I cannot put that sign up for the pool builder at this point? Or if this is enacted, they wouldn't be able to do that? Is that what this is saying?
Commissioner Nelson, this would be one example of a sign that you could have. So in addition, if there is a valid construction permit, so if you actually have, if there's a construction permit, which a
Okay.
pool would,
Sure.
a pool would require that, there would be an allowance for a construction sign. However, if you're doing landscaping only and someone's just having their yard completed, there may be no permits required. So we had to look at those other instances where you're not getting a construction permit. How do we cover that?
Yeah.
So this fills the gap. If you already have a construction permit needed for work that's being done, there would be another category to satisfy it.
Okay, thank you for that. Undeveloped property signs, undeveloped property signs. That one, what was my question on that? So the 3 years, I'm trying to remember where my train of thought was on that one. So, you know, when the housing market tanked, we've had neighborhoods that were for sale. It went on beyond 3 years. In fact, I have a friend who lives in one that's been consistently selling now for about 6 or 7. So how do we reconcile that with home builders who may have a development that's taking an extended period of time? Is it at 3 years, sorry, your sign comes down, and you're going to have to figure out other ways to draw people in from the right-of-way?
Commissioner Nelson, there's nothing that would stop a sign from being reinstalled. The same message could be installed in a sign. The main concern with these signs is that they are not designed to be permanent. They're not constructed out of materials that are intended to be in place for long duration. So this ensures that we don't have signs that are out there for 5 or 6 years that have been severely damaged or are just really have lost their integrity. So they could, if they have a large subdivision and they have that need, they could come in for a new sign permit. And again, that gives us that checkpoint to make sure we're looking at the sign, that it's still, it is up to snuff, what's being proposed, and it's not something that's just derelict.
So does that reset the clock then? I'm reading this as you can renew twice for 3 years total. Are you saying that they can come back, get another permit for another 3 years beyond the 3 years they originally had?
They would need to remove the initial sign. And again, because it's not designed to be in place for longer, but they could place a new sign there. So we now have, new materials. We ensure that it's still, designed and structurally capable of being maintained, so it's not a hazard. But the same message could be in place there on a new sign.
Even if the sign's in great shape, you still have to remove it?
And Commissioner Nelson, there may be occurrences where that's possible. Unfortunately, we've really seen the opposite in general, that the signs that are left are not, the Arizona sun is just really difficult, so it's challenging for those signs to not be worn just by the passage of time. So.
Very good, thank you. And then vehicle signs was the other question. So we talked about the ability to park these vans with wraps on them or vehicles that clearly have advertising on them. How would a semi-trailer, I see these semi-trailers parked predominantly in some areas. Is that considered a vehicle? Because it can't move itself. A vehicle can drive. Tell me how that works or that fits into this.
As it's designed to be moved, whether it's designed to be self-propelled or towed, it is considered a vehicle. Now, as a trailer, if it is used for other purposes, such as the storage of construction materials or machinery, it may serve dual purposes. So if it is on an in-progress construction site, it could be a trailer that has signage on it, but is serving that purpose of storage and, for the materials of construction. So that may be what you're seeing out there. It would have to meet the requirements, though. So if it's not used for another purpose, if it's simply being placed there as advertising, it would be considered a vehicle sign and would not be allowed.
Okay. We may want to clarify that in the language, just because I think of vehicle as something that can move itself.
And Commissioner Nelson, we do have a definition of vehicle sign a little bit earlier in the chapter that kind of specifies.
You're on top of it.
Yes.
Thank you for that. The building signs slide, I think that was under the permit, yes. Where we say creative installations, so I kind of get excited about this. It's kind of moving us away from these cookie cutter signs that we see in cities, including ours. So, I mean, could the language be modified to say creative installations are clearly permitted, or maybe this isn't the language in the.
Correct.
Is that the language in the?
It is not.
Oh, okay, that was just a talking point, okay. Because I would like to see us really encourage outside the box kind of signage. I mean, I love the drop down signage, that Main Street feel that, you get with that small town feel. I'd love to see us through the site, maybe we can't, but we should be encouraging those kind of things, I think. That's the direction I'd love to see the city go. Does this, and my final question, I promise, thank you for everybody's patience on this, is the electronic signs, is that outside the scope of this signage regulation? Is that dealt with separately in a different area of
Commissioner
range?
Nelson, the current sign code allows limited instances for what we call changeable copy. So changeable copy is, any sign where what's on there today is not what's on there tomorrow. We allow that for, essentially for gas stations. So gas stations, they have their price component. Arizona code actually requires that if they have a sign there, that they show the changeable copy. So for that, It could be changed either manually with the old pop-on letters or through electronic means. So wherever a changeable copy sign is permitted, they could use the electronic. However, as a whole, we have not proposed instituting electronic signage across the board. That does open up some concerns that we weren't trying to get into quite at this phase, given the scope of the project already. We understand it is a technology that is increasingly interested. However, there are a number of challenges in terms of defining, if everyone is comfortable with that type of electronic usage for all commercial purposes. So it's something that is not under this current proposal. It may be something to be considered in the future, but it wasn't something that we understood there was interest in pursuing full-on at this point.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate all your work on this. This is fantastic.
Okay, Commissioner Alsop.
Thank you. In my internship, I did sign permits when I was in college, and it was a thrilling part of my internship. So thank you for all the work that you've done on this. I had a couple questions on what we have existing today. How are you going to be enforcing these? There's, I live close to Happy Valley Parkway and Lake Pleasant, and there's just builder signs all over the place. There's going to be a dozen that are non-conforming. What's the plan with those going forward?
Commissioner Alsop, so all of our sign regulations or all zoning ordinance regulations are enforced through our code enforcement division. So they are charged with if there is a complaint regarding a potential code violation, they investigate the potential violation and would take action, whether criminal or civil. Obviously, there are warning processes, and there is due process along the way in terms of that, but it would be handled through code enforcement. So what we've tried with this code, and actually with the zoning ordinance as a whole, is to provide the options for enforcement so that they have the means to take action and to give them options, whether it be the criminal or civil side, depending on what's most appropriate. The code doesn't deal with the particularities of if it'd be a fine or what action would be taken. That is handled then on the bigger level through the enforcement. So our code enforcement is an arm of our police department, and that responsibility is delegated to them.
But in regards to the signs that will be non-conforming, are they grandfathered in, or would they be required to take them down?
So Commissioner Alsop, if a sign is legally non-conforming, meaning that it received a permit or that it met the standards at the time it was installed, it would be allowed to be maintained it would be able to, if it had a permit that was limited duration, it could ride out the rest of its permit. And then would have to be removed. However, I think a number of the signs you're talking about are illegal non-conforming signs. So they were never legally permitted. They aren't legal today. They wouldn't be legal tomorrow. And so those would be signs that could be subject to an enforcement action even under the current code. So if they weren't legal to start with, the new code wouldn't provide them any protection or coverage. But if it was a legal sign, if someone installed the sign and our rules changed, as long as they met the rules at the time that they put the sign in place, they could continue to meet that set of rules.
Is there, I'm sure you're right, a lot of those signs are non-conforming or illegal in the first place, because some of them are put on land that I managed without my approval in the first place. So what going forward, is there going to be increased surveillance of that? I mean, this looks fantastic, but it's only as good as people respect it and live by it. So in my opinion, there needs to be enforceability that maybe has not been happening in the past.
Commissioner Alsop, I know that the enforceability is always a challenge. Obviously, there are finite resources in terms of the enforcement officials. However, many of a very common way that they would understand that there's a potential concern is through citizen involvement and essentially, if there are complaints made or they are brought up, that gives them the opportunity to go out and specifically investigate the circumstance. Obviously, we have a very large city, so the officers are, spanning a really large geography, so they may not come across all of the instances, or it may be in process. So there may have been, a concern received. It may have been determined to be illegal, and it may be still working its way through the system. So there's a couple of things that could be occurring, but certainly if a citizen sees something that they believe to be a violation, reporting that, whether through the anonymous hotline or by contacting the code enforcement, provides a way for them to, ensure that that is looked into.
Great, thank you.
Okay, any other questions from commissioners? Okay, great report. As mentioned earlier, the next date for public comment would be on 10/5/17 at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, previous to the 10/17 council meeting. Okay, so moving on, we are up to call to the public. And I know we have a couple of speaker request forms for the call to the public. So we will call up Liz, I think Recchia, right? Okay. And please state your name and address for the record. Or do they have to do that for the record? Do they have to do that for the record or not?
My name is Liz Recchi. I'm the Government Affairs Director for WEMAR, the West Maricopa Association of Realtors. Is there anything more joyous than seeing balloons and streamers on a pathway leading you up to a children's birthday party, or seeing a large banner that says "Welcome Home" to a military member? Well, we love those sites, and you probably do too. But as we read the proposed sign ordinance, it appears to us that other signs such as this might be prohibited, and we're thinking about even signs such as the blue or gold star banners that might be hung in a window. WEMAR questions the necessity for government to regulate and prohibit personal expressions of joy, pride, and sorrow. We appreciate the provision for temporary signage at each entrance of the neighborhood. However, we're concerned that it's not adequate to the signage task, and that is whether it's an open house, a garage sale, a movie in the park, or any other event. We ask that this be changed so that a sign can be posted at each location, that a change of direction is necessary in order to effectively arrive at your location. And as far as the resident right-of-way sign that Ms. Sigmund just referenced, our concern is with the word adjacent to the residential property. WEMAR is concerned about small businesses that are hidden away in those secret shopping centers and are dependent upon signage at the entrance in order to be seen. So think about driving down Thunderbird and you're at 83rd and Thunderbird and you're trying to locate a small business in one of those complexes. It's nearly impossible. We question the compelling government interest of regulating helpful directional signs within a commercial, retail, or industrial type of center. Multiple stores or multiple faces of a building may need additional signage in order to be seen and easily located. We appreciate Table 4A being amended by staff, and we believe that the limited signage to outside the visual triangle should alleviate concerns of unmanageable numbers of signs at corners. We request a change in the language of table header, page 27. Currently reads properties listed for sale, rent, lease, or rent. However, property owners do have a right to sell or lease their own property without hiring a real estate licensee. So we suggest that change of language be to properties offered for sale, lease, or rent. We have additional concerns for language in the table regarding duration of signage for properties under 1 acre. The statement reads, while property is listed. We suggest this phrase be changed to while property is listed or actively offered, and we suggest this change be added to over 1 acre as well. We also suggest extending the language until a later of 10 days after the end of the listing or 10 days after completion of the lease sale transaction to the section regarding properties over 1 acre. WEMAR is concerned about signage be adequate, visible, and legible. We support the science of the visual arc in helping to determine adequate signage. And businesses located on busy streets with high volume maybe need more or different or larger signage than properties not located on busy streets. Property owners and agents trying to direct traffic to their location need signs in the public right-of-way and additional signage in the neighborhood in order to efficiently direct that traffic. So think about trying to direct someone from to a house here at 87th Avenue in Peoria versus a house in Vistancia or West Wing, and then think about the 6,500 homes that are going to be starting being built north of Vistancia. How do we get people up there? We appreciate the time and work staff has put into simplifying this sign ordinance. We are pleased staff has also taken into consideration comments from Weimar and other stakeholders. You've received written copies of our written comments from last year as well as earlier this summer. And if you have questions or concerns or want clarifications from us on any of that, please feel free to email or call me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, next up, we have Ken Parsons.
Good evening. I'm Ken Parsons, and my wife and I own a sign shop here in Peoria, Westside Signorama. And so we are involved in these issues and these concerns on a daily basis with other businesses that operate here in Peoria. And so first off, though, I want to thank Melissa and her staff and all the work that they've done in modernizing and simplifying the sign code, because that is not an insignificant task to undertake and to do that. And there have been some positive changes that have been made to the sign code, some things that are from somebody who's involved in it on a daily basis. So increasing the building size to 2 square feet gives our businesses a better opportunity to promote themselves and to let people know what they're doing, what's going on there. The calculation of building signage, Melissa didn't talk about it tonight, but she talked in the code, there is something about whole building signage, gives another way of calculating signage and making it more feasible for people to be able to get what they need. And of course, the removal of content-based regulations, that's, as Reed v. Gilbert regulations forced on us, but all of that's good. But there are several areas that I believe still need further discussion, some of which Melissa touched on tonight. I'd just like to touch quickly on 4 of them. One is the allotment of window signage in a storefront. In the code, it specifies 25%. That's not a change from previously. What it doesn't specify is how that window size is measured. There's a lack of definition. Is it a window or is it a group of windows just separated by mullions across a storefront? There's just a lack of definition, a lack of clarity in that particular instance, and it's something that I deal with my clients, with other businesses on a regular basis. There's another issue. We talked about monument signs. We don't talk about changing out monument faces. Does that require a permit? Can we do that whenever? That's something that occurs much more often, much more frequently than actually building a monument. The monument goes in once. We're constantly changing out monument faces. Don't know what to tell my customers about that. Did not see anything in the code, and there was nothing in the previous code really about that either, specifically addressing that issue. We talked about vehicles and vehicle signage and where to park vehicles, and the way that I read the code now is that I need to take my vehicle that I use daily in my business to drive into customer sites, visiting customers, and now I need to park it, and I'm not sure how far away. I need to park it somewhere back in the back 40 somewhere to get it as far away as possible from the right of way. It just seems to me that's an odd requirement for a business. And I understand the requirement. We don't want non-movable vehicles parked out on the front corner. But there seems to me there's got to be some further discussion and some compromise on that topic. And then we also, there was a question about EMCs, electronic message centers, and it seems to me that if we're looking to modernize our sign code, we want to take advantage of modern technology and the way that things are going. And so just to prohibit those out of hand would seem to limit the types of things that our businesses can do. And if we want to be a business attractive community, then I think we need to look at modern and current ways of doing that. And I understand it takes a lot of work, but there's a lot of work been done. And Melissa mentioned working with other organizations and industry organizations that have done a lot of that work and have proposed sign codes and language that would make that feasible. So in conclusion, I would really ask that the Commission consider a need for further discussion around the sign code, that we need to have further discussion and clarify, and the topics or the issues that I suggested tonight are just a few of the items. There are others in the code that I believe require further discussion before we pass this into sign code and have to deal with it on a regular basis. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next up, we have Susan Nicholson.
Good evening. My name is Susan Nicholson, address for the record 6221 West Hedgehog Place. I am a Realtor with DPR Realty. I'm a board member on the Women's Council of Realtors for the West Valley. I'm here tonight regarding the sign ordinance because we have enormous concerns in my industry about 4 times per year, because there are luxury properties out there that take more than, it can take more than a year to sell a $2 million property and $2 million valued property in Peoria. There are not so many buyers for that piece of property out there. So we have longer marketing times, and our clients would be rather upset with us if we only held 4 open houses with them in a year. There are some communities within the city of Peoria, like Sonoran Mountain Ranch, West Wing, Pleasant Valley, Cibola Vista, that are up in your far northern area, and we desperately need adequate signage. And to me, adequate is, if your car has to turn, I need an arrow to let you know that you are getting to the open house. You're making progress to the open house. It doesn't do me any good to be able to place a sign. So, common area.
Any comments? Kevin?
Encourage outstanding design, and it's all performance-based. I would encourage you to look at that if you want to go down that path in a way that's a little bit becoming art. And there's a lot of places where if certain districts you may want to create a little bit of energy. It's a fantastic sign type that currently it's with the electronic ballasts and the way they're designed, they're highly efficient, and they look absolutely fantastic, I think, from a design perspective and creativity. By not allowing them, it limits creativity on the designer part. And also, so there's some programming on landscaping. This is just a landscape be minimal.